Hello and welcome to another episode of
Absolute Game Off. Nerd!
And I realized I got the wrong banner there scrolling across. Hold on one second.
I was trying to read it, but there we go.
It is. All right. So sorry about that technical issue. JP's not here. It's just a mess over here. But yes, as you can see, everyone, it is just me tonight. JP is taking his one of his daughters. They had a dance competition out of state, so he is doing that tonight. So I'm flying solo. And with me today, I have Aaron from AOnes Comics. I met Aaron way back when I first started collecting. It was either, I'm not 100% sure, but it's either him or Joseph of Wolverine's Comic Shop were one of the first two people I bought from Instagram off of. And I remember the first book I bought from you was Iron Man and Submariner.
There we go. With the interior page tear, I think you had, right?
There's a little tear on the page.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then my first big book purchase, my FF49, was from Aaron as well. If you remember, I sent the PayPal to the wrong email. I was off my letter, and I was like, thankfully PayPal took my store because it was like a counterfeit email, and they gave it back. So, crisis averted. But anyways, Aaron, say hello. How you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on. Like I kind of mentioned before, I was very caught off guard by the invite. I mean, I've never had anyone ask me about comic books, so it's cool to be able to talk about that.
So is this your first then kind of podcast then?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm for sure listen to other people's stuff. I'm a big follower of Dave, West Coast Avengers, and all the stuff he was doing with Manu, but it's the first time I'm actually taking part in the podcast. So yeah, no.
You're taking it part. You're the main story here tonight.
Yeah, it's very flattering. So
right on. Well, we're happy to be your first. Yeah. So Aaron, as always, we always start with the same question, which is, what is your origin story? So take us way back, the original spark into the comic hobby, comic world, Marvel, whatever it is, take us back.
So I always starting off my first memory of comics, whether or not I was actively collecting or not, right? But I guess I should say somebody was collecting for me. So my first memory that I can remember of me in comic books is I'd go visit my dad every summer. So my parents were divorced, so I'd be with my mom during school year. And then my dad in the summer, he lived out in El Paso, Texas. So I'd go there for the summers. But every time I'd go, there'd be a stack of comic books waiting for me. I don't necessarily know how it became comic books, how he thought, hey, he's going to like these or something. I was big on.
Was he into them?
No, and that's the crazy part. I mean, I never really got all the details, but I think what ultimately happens, my mom kind of oh, he's really into these XMen shows and Spider-Man and stuff like that, So I don't know, maybe she was trying to dropping hints to him for him to catch on. So he got a stack of comic books, and that became my bedtime stories. So when it was time for bed, Dad would pop out a comic book, and that's what he would read to me.
Was it X-Men and Spider-Man that he was getting you then?
It was a wide range of stuff. A lot of Wolverine, actually, which is weird because now Wolverine, I'm kind of on. I like him, but he's not my favorite mutant or X-Men, So I just remember a lot of Wolverine, a lot of X-Men. At the time, was a lot of the reprints. I vividly remember the classic X-Men. A lot of that, and a lot of Spider-Man. Which is another character that I'm not too crazy about now, but still, that's where it started for me. My dad, taking the time to do that, and then so as I went back to my mom's, he would send me stuff in the mail. So you can imagine being a 7-8-year-old kid getting comic books in the mail, not a kind of a surprise because it's different. Back then you didn't really know when you're going to get mail, or you didn't have tracking info, right? Nowadays we know the exact hour it's going to show up to our house, right? But back in the day, getting stuff through the mail as a kid and just opening the box and having comic books, and he worked at a printer, so basically they'd make signs and T-shirts and stuff like that. He'd make me posters of images he would pull from those comic previews, where they that the comic book shops would get, saying oh, there's the comic books coming out. So he'd take images from there, blow them up, and put them on posters and T-shirts for me. So yeah, that was really cool. Thinking back on it now, they didn't last long because it's terrible direct to garment printing, which doesn't hold up on T-shirts. But I had a lot of cool T-shirts that I can think of. A lot of basic comic art on T-shirts that he would print for me. So yeah, man, like as I think about it, like I was always big into comic books and just Marvel in general. That's really what he would buy me the most. Marvel. I didn't really stick to like Batman or Superman like most people. It was really like Spider-Man and Wolverine. And another summer that I went out there, there was a few shops out in El Paso, some that aren't there anymore. But they would do this thing where they would have like a dude in a costume dress up as like Spider-Man, like some comic books for kids.
Your OG
So
cosplay stuff right
yeah,
there.
so basically they'd pay some random dude put on a costume and sign books for kids, right? So I remember two distinct signings went for that, and again it was Spider-Man and Wolverine. Uh, that was really cool. I still have those books actually. It's just like it says to Aaron from Spider-Man, which is pretty lame thinking about it, but and at the time, like I knew it wasn't them, like I knew it was just somebody in a costume, but I still thought it was the coolest thing ever. Um, but yeah, that's where I got started, man. That's where I got hooked on it. And then, like I kind of mentioned, the cartoons, right? That I think a lot of us are big, X-Men '97, right? A lot of us are big on the cartoons with X-Men and Spider-Man. So that was kind of always in the background for me. And then I kind of branched out into like anime. Like I was big on Dragon Ball as a kid. I'd watch it in Spanish when I'd go visit my grandmother, because that's like the only way I could watch it. Just Spanish dubbed on the channels that we'd pick up on the antenna from across the border. So I got big into anime, but like comics and Marvel was always in the background for me. Now collecting wise, like I would just casually pick up stuff going to 7-Eleven. That's where I buy a lot of stuff. Me and my cousin would go get Slurpees and hey, I have money, I'll buy a comic book. So I had like a really amateur collection growing up as a kid. A lot of those books didn't hold up, covers falling off, stuff like that. But still, like we would just go over those books over and over and over again until they become like tattered and torn. It's going through the same panels, same stories over and over again. And then I also distinctly remember buying that the Claremont and Jim Lee X-Men one from a comic book store. This was a little after it came out. We didn't pick it up when it came out. We were still pretty young at the time, but I vividly remember going to the comic book store to get that, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Oh,
And
we all did. We all
yeah,
thought that. We all were like, "It's the number one. It's gonna
right.
take. We're in the
It's
money."
gonna
Oh
take
yeah.
off it. But that's what I was gonna mention. I mentioned my cousin, but his dad, my uncle, at the time he bought a stack of them. He's like, these are gonna be worth something someday. And so I can say my uncle probably contributed to that high, the record of it being like the highest selling comic, because he bought a stack of them.
Well, that's funny. Do you follow Cheddar Comics by chance? Chris,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
did you see his post this week where he bought a collection? I think there was 256 X-Men ones in it. Apparently the guy bought them in
No, I
1991
didn't see that.
thinking, yeah, because Chris took all these pictures of it all around him. And he said the guy bought it in 91 thinking that it was
X-Men
gonna
everywhere.
be just the biggest thing ever, thought he was gonna be rich and sold it for pennies on the
Yeah, I mean,
dollar.
I don't blame them. I don't blame for the people. I don't blame the people that did it because again, X-Men was pretty big at the time. The show was big. I remember all the merchandising at the time. I remember buying that hat from like I don't know what department store it was, but that I stuck with that hat for a long time. But yeah, it was a big deal at the time, so I'm not surprised. Um, I mean, the comics in general was in the '90s, right? That's when the big boom was going on. And I remember too him buying a lot of copies. When I say him, my uncle buying a bunch of copies of like Death of Superman when that came out.
Oh yeah,
Which at
another
the
one
time,
we
I
all
remember me and my
thought,
cousin
yeah,
thinking that was
especially with the
like,
black
man, there's no more
bag.
Superman. Yeah, yeah. So he gave us one copy for us to take out of the bag and stuff. The other ones he kept. Um, but yeah, just stuff like that you vividly remember. I remember uh, some at some point my dad would come out here to visit. We're just staying in Texas, and that's when Spawn was really big. So he tried getting me like a lot of Spawn comic books, which I thought were cool. I really liked the art and McFarlane, right? But it never really stuck to me. I don't know if it was because it was maybe a little too mature for me at the time, because I mean Spawn could get pretty gory. I mean it's
Yeah.
kind of not like real gory, but it's all the green blood and stuff like that. So I don't know, maybe that's why I didn't take to it at the time. But a lot of Spawn comics. I remember going there. I think there used to be a shop at Universal City Walk back in the day. I remember going there to get some Spawn books. I thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, so I remember that from the '90s. But yeah, like I said, comics have always kind of just been around in the background. Never a really serious thing. Like I kind of mentioned, like most of our stuff would just get tattered and torn. Wasn't big on keeping stuff in the bags and boards and stuff like that. That didn't come till later. But yeah.
Yeah, so then talk to us about later. What brought you back in, and what brought you not only back in, but like actually into it? Like, this is a thing I am doing.
Thing I'm gonna spend money and time and
Yeah.
money on. So I guess before I got to that point, there was a point in my kind of like, I think as I was leaving college, not leaving college, sorry, graduating high school and going into college, where I found myself like on a message board. It was a music message board, but one of the threads was about comic books. Like, hey, what are you guys reading at the time? You know, so I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, you know, I didn't really keep up at that time. I'm trying to remember when that was. If I graduated in '07, it was probably like '08 or '09. I was really keeping up with comics. But anyways, there was this thread about people posting what they're reading, and then someone went out of the way to kind of share some of the scans of the comics. I'm trying to remember the file type, but basically they would kind of download stuff from torrent sites, you know, and also like Pirate Bay. They download these large files of just scans from comic books, so you can just read your comic book on your computer, which I thought was like really cool at the time. Like, I don't have to buy anything, which is very illegal, but still. So that's how I got back into reading stuff, because just people recommending like, oh, you need to read this. This is one of the bigger events that happen. You should read this. So that's where I read stuff like World War Hulk, which I thought was like the coolest thing ever at the time. I'm trying to remember what else I picked up during that. But anyways, I fell back into reading stuff while I was in college. Not buying, because I didn't really have the money for that. I'm a broke college student, right? All the money I did have was like for going out or stuff like that, you know? So just being able to read stuff was always kind of nice to me. But eventually, once I got out of school, once I got a somewhat serious job and started making money, I'm not sure what prompted me to do it, but I ended up back at a comic book store because I was just like, I want something to read, you know, and I don't want to read it on my computer or laptop anymore. I want something physically to have and read, you know. So I went to my local comic book shop at the time, which is Comic Madness in Chino, California. And I bought some trade paperbacks to start off, right? Because it's like I didn't know which single issues to get to complete like whole storyline, so I'll just get these trade paperbacks. So that's where I kind of got back into spending money on stuff, and it was just trades. But again, getting sucked into the story, I would talk to the guy behind the register, and he'd recommend stuff. And then that's where I kind of got to the point where it's like, oh, if you enjoyed that, this series comes out, you should start buying these issues and stuff like that. So, I mean, I don't know if it was kind of a sales tactic, but that's how I kind of got sucked in to start buying comics again on a somewhat regular basis, just trying to pick up stuff that was good to read. And I also remember that because they had recommended a series that like I'm still in love with, and I recommended anyone that like is even thinking about reading any type of X-Men or mutant book, which was Rick Remender's Uncanny X-Force run. I don't know if you checked it out, but
I haven't.
it's really good. I'm a huge fan of Remender as it is, but that series was one that like I just got really sucked into the point where it's like I needed to buy every issue. Like, even though there was already the trades, right? I still had to go through, get every issue. I wanted every variant cover because I love that series so much, you know. And I remember at the time it was such a daunting task because I had a job, but it wasn't like a really good paying job. So like some of the variant covers at the time were pretty expensive. Like I think there was a Rob Liefeld variant cover for issue 1 that I always wanted, but I never got because it was like $100 at the time, which to me that's a lot. It was a lot of money.
Yeah.
we'll go into the money thing later, but at that time, $100 that was a lot of money for a single issue, you know. So that kept me busy for a while buying the books for that run, the different variant covers, and then from there I kind of just started branching out. Like I was like, again, that series is written by Rick Remender, and then I found out he did a series for Venom, Agent Venom, which is really good. Or it's not called Agent Venom, but that series of Venom that he did was like the first introduction of Flash Thompson as Agent Venom, which I fell in love with. That was also a good one, and that's another one I dived in. Like I need every issue, every variant cover. And on that note, when I think about it, the whole collecting aspect of it, like I need every one of that. Like that's always been with me. Like no matter whether it's comic books, whether it was like Yu-Gi-Oh cards or Pokemon cards, like I was always a guy like I need everything, you know. I don't know where I got that from.
You got a completionist mentality.
Yeah, but it's weird because like I don't have that right now with my comic books in a sense. Well, I mean, aside from X-Men, but I guess we'll talk about that. But yeah, like now I know when to like say like, hey, I don't need this, you know. But back in the day, it's like that I needed to have every card, every variant covered, and you know stuff like that. So that's what I think that kind of played into me buying everything from those first two series that I just got hooked on. And so then like after that Rick Remender Venom thing, I started branching out to like all other Venom stuff. And then that's when I came to the thing like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to have ASM 300, right? Because that's the first appearance of Venom. I feel like I like Venom. So yeah, that was kind of like one of the first big books I bought myself. It was only like a 7.0 slab copy. I don't remember how much I paid for it, but that was like one of the first slabs I bought for myself. And it was pretty cheap at the time. But yeah, so after that, like I started kind of just branching out, like getting some Venom, getting some X-Men stuff, a lot of modern stuff at the time, because I felt like that was at the shop and that's what I was exposed to. Like if I was lucky enough to find like a Bronze Age thing at the shop or like at a swap meet or a yard sale or something, like, you know, I'd pick it up because it's like, oh, this is old, this is cool. But I was never really that serious about picking up older stuff because, like, I don't know, like the stories never really stood out to me. And I mean, I feel like a lot of us can agree a lot of the writing back in the day wasn't very good. Like when you look at the old X-Men issues, like 1 through 50, and it's like, this is terrible, right?
Yeah.
Of course, it's a time capsule, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's just like if you read a novel that's, you know, several, you know, older novels, you're like, this is boring.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, that's why like the older stuff didn't really stick with me at the time. And I guess ultimately I was kind of like all over the place, you know? Um, But then I started picking up more slabs and more expensive variant covers. Like I know for that Venom run, like for issue 1, they had all these different colors for the later printings. Like I think the first printing was a white background, the second printing was red, the third printing was orange, then the fourth printing, which is like the later one, the harder to find, more expensive one, was pink. And yeah, like I had to have them all, and that's when I started again. The bar gets higher and higher in terms of like what you're spending on a single issue, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So then at that point, like I think at the time, my wife, well, she wasn't my wife at the time. We had moved out into our own apartment, and I had my comic books in the closet. And like slowly and slowly, the short box starts stacking up, you know. Um, and I kind of had a moment where it's like, well, do I really need all of these, you know? And I was lucky enough to have met someone that huge influence on me, a huge impact on me. At the time, I worked for a health insurance company, and he was the director of the department I worked in. I'm not sure how he caught on that I like comic books, and he's like, "Oh, you like comic books? I like comic books. I have all these comic books from when I was a kid and stuff like that." So we kind of hit it off like that. And then one day he's like, "Oh, hey, you want to see what I got? I brought some of my books." And like, so he has this box. Just like it's like a pretty beat up box, like whatever, and he opens it up and he has to, you know, tells the suspense. First Iron Man, he has Daredevil 1, Strange tells well, it's the first Doctor Strange is what I'm trying to think of.
110.
110 there, thank you. And just like casually, like, oh yeah, like this, I got this stuff, you know, I know the first appearances. I'm like, do you know how much these are worth now? Like, and he had like no real perception of like
that's kind of awesome, to be fair, to be perfectly honest. That's kind of awesome.
Yeah, and I was like, you just have these just like casually, like, what are you doing? And it's like, well, I was thinking about grading them, but like, I need funds for that and stuff like this. So he didn't really want to spend money on that. But I'm like, well, you know, you can try selling some of these to get to grading the other stuff, right? But anyways, so we had that conversation, just like seeing all those old books he has, and he was telling me like, yeah, a lot of these I bought off the newsstand as a kid. At one point, he found out I was big into Moon Knight, which that was another character that I fell into. Like after Venom, I got hooked on Moon Knight, and he's like, "Oh, I have all these issues from like when they came out, like of issue 1, and throughout the series. Like when they came out, I bought them off the newsstand. Me and my brother would drive around to all the different newspaper stores, basically like the newsstands, to pick them up, and at the grocery stores. So like." Eventually, at one point, he brought a box, and they were just like filled with multiple copies of Moon Knight Volume 1. So like, I probably want to say around like 30 copies of issue 1, maybe like 10, 15 copies of like the cooler issues, like 25 and 29, you know, those black covers. And it's just like, I was just amazed because like to me, those are like some of the nicer books and they were like in really nice condition. He's like, yeah, I've had these in this box since I bought them, you know? So he was nice enough to sell me a few of them at that point. So that was cool. But when we had that conversation and we talked about selling books, you know, and he's like, that's the thing I need to overcome. Like, how do you really get to the point where it's like, you just want to let stuff go? And as I couldn't really speak to that because even I had that issue, right? I spoke about
Yeah,
the
to have every
boxes
variant
in my
cover.
closet. Yeah. Right. But then I was like, you know what, maybe we can try doing that. So we ended up setting up together at it was like a small regional local show out here in the city of Claremont. They don't do it anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, we paid for a booth. We set up outside. And yeah, that's the first time I actually attempted to sell like my books. And I used the money that I made that day to buy myself Werewolf by Night 32.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's when it clicked. Like, hey, I can use these books to buy better books. So, like, I think I need to kind of invest more time and effort making sure I get the right books so I can make the most money, so I could get the nicer books. You know. So yeah, like that was crazy to me. Like, I think yeah, I made about $600 that day selling books, which at the time was a lot of money. This was maybe early 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saved that money that I got, and then there was a local convention out here, Ontario Comic Con Revolution, and that's where I bought World Finite 32. It was a raw copy. It was about a 6065. Yeah, like that day, like I still remember that was the most expensive book I ever bought. Like that feeling, right? You're like just so nervous. Like, oh, am I really gonna give this person this wad of money for that book? You know? And of course you're scared, like, oh, what if it's not as nice as they say it is? Because at that point, like, you had a general idea of grading because I had said I bought a few slabs. I've never submitted anything at that time. So it's like, you how do you really trust this person? It's like, this is the book the grade that it is, you know. And of course, then I found out stuff about like restoration and stuff like that. So yeah, I think looking back on it, I probably should have did my due diligence, but at that point, it's like, I got $600. I want that book. Give me that book.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a common experience with all of us, right? Like if we all knew what we know now, going back to when we started, it would be a different, but that's how you learn.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to have those low points, and we all have them. And I know a lot of people I talk to, especially on Instagram, they're like, when they get like purple labels on books and stuff like that, and they're like, that's why I don't want to buy raw books. I just want to buy on slab. Just like, you're gonna get to the point where you're gonna know what to look for because you've got these books back that end up with purple labels, and that's how I learned. We'll get to the next part of the story where I tell you more about how my relationship with restoration. But yeah, no, that's how you learn. You kind of make those mistakes. You have to kind of look back on things and say, like, how would I have done it differently. And that's the only way you learn, to get to the point where like you feel more comfortable in what you're buying. And I think it kind of helps you kind of appreciate your collection more when you get to that point, because you're kind of making the smarter decisions on stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Werewolf by Night 32. That was the big book, the first big book I bought.
Well, then talk to me. I mean, so anyone that follows you know that now you have a very specific kind of lane that you are collecting. And you started off by telling us how you're not a big Wolverine fan, you're not a big Spider-Man fan anymore, but we all know you love X-Men, you love Doctor Doom.
Yeah.
So I think we can all kind of get to where you got to the X-Men, but like, where's the Doctor Doom tie-in, and then, why X-Men, not Wolverine, that kind of thing.
So I think with Doctor Doom, I distinctly remember the Fantastic Four cartoon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Doctor Doom was always cool. Like, he was a cool villain. You could probably see the art up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know why I got to the point where it's like, I was like, I think it was when the whole Venom thing started, when I was collecting like villains or anti-heroes, whatever you want to call them. Doom was one of them. But of course, Doom's like, that's an expensive book. So like, I never even touched that. But I started picking up like Doom adjacent stuff after I got the Moon Knight book, because I realized I can do this. I can get the expensive books. And at the time, to me, like, those old Silver Age FF books were pretty expensive. So it just started like all these things like I liked, but always told myself I couldn't afford. Like I realized I can put in the work to get them because I did it with this one, you know. So yeah, it really Doom was just start off as like, you know, a cool character, a cool villain to me, but my collecting with it kind of happened after Moon Knight once I realized like I can make this stuff happen. And again, as I kind of mentioned, like I wasn't really touching Bronze Age or Silver Age books because they just seemed too expensive. So Moon Knight was like that first gateway drug for me, you know, like this first big book, this first old book that I was able to afford because I sold off everything else. So Doom, or would say FF5, was one of the books that I kind of worked towards, like again, because just having to put in work, getting rid of books and getting to that level, I was able to knock that off. So X-Men. So X-Men, as I kind of mentioned, that was the TV show was it for me, you know, like that was my favorite thing at the time. And I remember my dad reading those comic books to me. So it was like, again, once I knocked out Moon Knight, it's like, well, why don't I start focusing on this, you know? So I started just picking up some of the Claremont stuff, not any of the keys because, you know, I didn't have any money for that. Just like reading it. And I had read the Dark Phoenix storyline when I was reading the online scans and stuff. At the time, I thought it was pretty cool. But it didn't really resonate with me at that time, I think, because I was just kind of going through everything. But yeah, once I started kind of connecting the dots in terms of like, you know, that run was like it for X-Men, you know, like I don't think anything kind of came close to that. So that's when I kind of said like that's one of the first X-Men books I want to start getting, like that run, that Bronze Age run, you know.
Yeah, so when I first started following you, you know, you collected X-Men, you collected Doom, but you also collected at least at the time, you had Venom, I remember, you had some Silver Surfer stuff, but now you've become even more focused, it seems. So tell everyone like what is your lane? Like what is your goal now? Like what are you focused on?
Right now it's kind of like it came down to when the boom happened. You know, you spend all these money on these books, but at that point I started kind of thinking like, why do I need all of this stuff? Like you kind of mentioned, I had Venom, I had my Werewolf by Night 32, what's the other, Surfer. I had some Silver Surfer books. Like I just bought those because I thought they were cool, but it got to that point again where I was just like, do I really need all this stuff? So again, it was me fighting with my completionist attitude that I've had since I was a kid. Like I need to have everything. So at that point I was like, I need to buy all these cool covers because they're cool, you know? But I sat down and was like, well, what do I really like? What do I really cherish the most out of having these? And like, it kind of just defaulted to X-Men. Um, I, I had a hard time having that conversation with myself, like letting go of some of these bigger books. But again, it came to like, why wouldn't I really want to have these kind of books that I would appreciate having more, you know? So that's when I kind of cut ties with everything else. So and I did that during the boom. Like I let go of all my Silver Surfer books, my FF 48 and 49 that I had picked up, stuff like that I picked up out of just me. Like I need to have everything, and because I just kind of thought to myself like, what am I really going to get the most joy out of owning? You know, what am I going to cherish the most? And to me, it always fell back to X-Men because that's was kind of like my first introduction. You know, like with comic books. And the show again, I think if anything, it's probably the show more than anything because that's like what I vividly remember as from my childhood, that the cartoon show. So yeah, that just kind of had that conversation with myself, like, what are you really gonna have? What are you gonna have the most joy out of owning something? So I kind of just blocked everything out, you know, like I stopped spending money on FF books, Surfer books, Moon Knight stuff. Like I used to have the full run of Moon Knight, like that first volume one, but like I kind of just figured like I only need issue one and issue the Werewolf by Night 32. Everything else can go, you know. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's just having that conversation with yourself. Just like, what are you really gonna enjoy owning?
And so now, so I know, is it what you're collecting? It's X-Men 1 through what? And then I know you're a big GSX1 guy. And then is it like every FF book with Doom on it under 100 maybe? And then you're just kind of like going through those and then coming back upgrading, going through, coming back
Yeah,
upgrading, right?
that's all I do because it's just I kind of said like, why am I going to spend money on stuff that I don't really like, or I like it, but it's like you don't really like it. So that's what I've been doing. Like I started off, you know, I had sporadic X-Men issues, but I told myself, you know, here's the goal. I'm going to get an X-Men 1, Like I'm going to start with that. Like I started at the top because again, I had that conversation. Like, why do I need all these books? I can turn all these books into that if I tried hard enough, you know? So I say I kind of make the smart decision, but also I guess it depends how you think about it. But I got rid of all those books during the boom because essentially there was a lot of money on the table, right? Yeah, the price of X-Men 1 was inflated, but had I not sold those books, I would have never got that X-Men 1. So you kind of think about it, it kind of all evened out.
Evens
right?
out, yeah.
Yeah, all those books I sold off, the price.
Because the money for the books you sold would then also have dropped as well. So.
Exactly, and I would have never really had the chance. So that's what I ended up doing. Like I had Adam Blue Marvel, like that, the issue 1 and a 9.8 that I found that on Mercari of all places, and I got that graded, and it came back a 9.8, which I was crazy about at the time. And I thought, like, this is such a cool book. I don't want to get rid of this book ever. And then, of course, it came to like, well, do I want this or do I want X-Men? And I think at that time the book was signed for like $2,400, which is crazy because it's a modern book, right? Yeah, it's not printed. It didn't have really high printing, but still, it's like X-Men 1. You know, you kind of have to weigh it out. And then Doctor Doom stuff, yeah, like I had kind of mentioned with once I got Werewolf by Night 32 out of the way, like I kind of realized I can get these books. So I started off small, just like raw copies of those early Doctor Doom books, and usually they're pretty beat. And just like you said, like I just kept upgrading them because it's like I decided I want the nicest presenting copy I can afford. Like I like this book, I like this cover, I want it as looking as nice as possible, you know.
So on the X-Men side, though, what is it 1 through what that you're collecting, and then GSX 1, or what exactly is it?
So I initially started 1 through 10, and then once I got that out of the way, I did 1 through 66.
Okay.
Which is
the original Silver.
Yeah, I skipped the reprints because again, it's me competing with that completionist thing, me reasoning that I don't need to have all that because I technically already have that. It's just a different cover.
Yeah.
And then from there, I moved on to 94 through 150, and then I went from 150 to 200. So I have a few things after 200, but I kind of told myself I'm only going to put the real money towards like the early issues. So like 1 through 10, I have them all slabbed. Issues after 10 that I have slabbed are just like the key issues. And that was really kind of a decision. Like, and I had a conversation with my wife, and she's like, of course, what's going to happen when you go, right? What's going to happen when you die and you have all these books and stuff? Like, to me, it became a thing. Like, if I could, for these more expensive books, like if I could get them slabbed, that way to kind of make it easier if something ever happens, you know? Because at that point, like, you know what it is. It's easy to kind of sell in terms of like if you just ship everything off to like Heritage or something, you know? Because it's a graded book. It's harder to dispute a price at that point. You kind of just like let it go and get rid of it. So that's why I kind of made sure like all the bigger books are just slab, you know, but everything else from all those other X-Men issues is just all raw. Because to me, it's like I like having them, but they're not really going to bring any value. You know what I mean? Like they're not the big money books. So that's what I did in terms of like which ones are slab, which ones are raw. But as of right now, yeah, it's 1 through 200 that I have. Again, I have a few after 200, and then I have the GSX. Which that book, like it started off like I remember seeing that book in the shops back in the day, but like I never knew anything about it. I didn't think of anything about it. But I bought my first one when probably like a month after my son was born. Also during the boom. So this is like July 2020. He's trying to open the door. Yeah, so that's when I picked up my first GSX, and I started low at a 5.5, and a couple of months later I saw 6.5 on eBay on auction, and I was just like, hey, you know, why not? The price is really low. So of course, and right at the end it starts going up, but I won that, which at the time that was like the first time I actually attempted to upgrade something. Because I already had a 5.5, but it's like, hey, there's a 6.5, and it's signed, and it's pretty cheap at the time. So I was like, why not? You know, I bought it, and then I realized like it started kind of clicking in my head. Like again, that whole thing of I want the nicest copy possible, and especially with that cover, because like that cover just stands out. You know, when I think of X-Men, I think of that cover. I mean, yeah, I guess the Jim Lee Claremont thing, like I grew up with that, and that's kind of more resonating with the show. But to me, like that cover of Giant Size X-Men, like that's just the most iconic in terms of like comic book art.
It is, and when I got my copy, like I remember like sitting there looking at it, being like, "Wow, this is better than I imagined."
Yeah, right. And it's just like the colors are nice, the composition. I mean, it's the only bad thing about that book is that usually it's always uh, beat to crap. Like the spine's always messed up. The overhang on the edges is always kind of like folded in. You know, it's like so. It's when you see a really nice copy, to me, it's like the most beautiful book ever. Like,
yeah, and I mean, you start with 5.5. You're at, what are you at, like a 9.2 now?
I got a 9.4 maybe 2-3 weeks ago. Yeah,
Nice.
so I went from a 5.5 to a 6.5 to a 7.5 to an 8.5 to the 9.4.
And let it be known here first, people. Aaron is going after the 9.9 on Comic Connect in June. He's been selling comics all over the place to make up the 200 grand or whatever it's going to go. Aaron's getting it.
There's no way. Well, you know, I say that it's like I couldn't live with myself spending that much money on a book, but then it's like I probably said the same thing about that, and yet here I am buying a 9.4 GSX. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I have seen you comment on a couple of the 9.8s that like pop up on Elite.
Right? Yeah, that's why I think I had mentioned that once. Like, oh, you know, what if I just take money out of retirement? Like, who retires anymore, right?
Yeah.
Nowadays. But yeah, no, that idea got shot down. But yeah, no, it's just it to me. It's like to have that book in such a high grade. Like that's like peak collecting to me. You know, like you put in all this time and effort getting all this stuff, and when you get into the process of selling stuff, like it takes a lot of time. You know, and like I tell myself, like I need to make it worth it because like I think of like all the late nights packing books here, all the trips to the post office, stuff like that. And like yeah, there's people that do that for a job. You know, like dealers or whatever you want to call them, sellers, flippers, whatever. But like when you do this kind of like as a hobby to kind of help fund your books, like it takes a lot of time and effort. It's a lot of late nights. Like you got to do it on top of your day job, you know. And that's why I do it because it's like I kind of told my wife like I don't want to spend any of my own money to get stuff for myself. You know, I don't want to take any of the family's money for that. So like all the upgrades and books that I've been doing for like the last 2-3 years, like it's all been I like to call it the house's money, right? Like if we're using like casino gambling terms, I don't spend any of my paycheck money on that. Like this all money from selling books. But I mean, well, there's probably other parts you talked about that in terms of selling, but we'll get to that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, tell me about like so. You know, if you follow you on Instagram, you always see you got lots of sale posts. They're always going up. Where are you finding your inventory to move to make the money to buy what you want?
I pretty much scour every stone on the internet, and just local people out here that I've come to know. I mean, as much as we all hate it, to me, excuse me, the most value, like in terms of like deals, I still see is like eBay a lot of the time, right? Like auctions are always like, it seems like they're just going lower and lower, especially the past couple of, yeah, I would say years now, right? So a lot of auctions. There's a lot of dealers out here that have warehouse sales every now and then. So I'm always there like early in the morning before they even open the door, waiting. I do a lot of Craigslist. I don't do Facebook Marketplace. What's another one? Craigslist and well, OfferUp's kind of dried up, you know. But yeah, just kind of working your connections really. That's the biggest thing. But I could say the first like real inventory I ever got. Well, I guess it's a good transition to kind of what I mentioned earlier. I kind of talked about my old boss, right? At my old job, Greg. Right? I don't think I mentioned his name. When we had that first outing to selling books, you know, it went pretty good for both of us. I had some money to get that world point. He thinned out a lot of the stuff that he had. He had a lot of stuff. So one day after I left the company, he emails me and says, "Hey, I got a business proposition for you. When can you meet for lunch?" You know, and I don't know what the hell it was at the time. It's like, "Hey, sure, it's Greg. Whatever, we'll talk." Yeah, so he's like, "I'm moving to Utah. We don't want to take all these books." And when he said a lot of books, I didn't really think of anything. Like, oh, maybe he has a couple of long boxes, you know. So he essentially asked, "Would you want to sell my collection like on consignment?" And we split it I'm trying to remember what the split was, 60-40, I think, because it is all his inventory, right? But I did all the work to like move everything, you know.
Yeah, which is a
So
lot.
it's a lot. It's a lot of work, especially again when it's not the main thing you're doing, you know. So I was like, oh, and at the time this was before my son was born, so I was kind of like weighing it, like, do I really want to fall into this? Like, yeah, I like selling comic books. I was doing it, at that small show. I was big on Mercari at the time too. I was moving a lot of stuff there. So I was like, yeah, I want to give it a shot, but I told my wife, like, this is going to take a lot of time and effort to do, but she supported me. So I told Greg, sure, let's see what you got. So I go to his place, and basically he has like a closet under the stairs, like one of those crawling or whatever. I don't know what the proper term is. Not a crawl space, but there's a closet storage room.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And I go in there, and dude, it's like filled with bugs. So I was like, holy shit, what did I get myself into? Yeah, I was just blown away, and I was like, wow. Like
what quantity are we talking about here?
I'm trying to remember. I think it was probably around like he had them in these. They weren't technically short boxes. He had modified some magazine boxes. He's very crafty like that. So it's about the size of a short box, and within that crawl space, there was probably like, I want to say around 20 short boxes, and then there was probably about like 10 or 12 long boxes.
Okay, so we're talking about a few thousand books here then.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a lot, man. And I was kind of, I was like, I basically I told him, like, I need to see the books first to kind of see like how much time and effort it's going to take me before I say yes to anything. But when I saw those books, I kind of thought like, maybe I shouldn't do this because this is a lot of books. And then he sent me a spreadsheet of like some of the stuff that was in there. And as I started going through the spreadsheet and I started seeing the books in there, I'm like, okay, this might probably isn't going to be that bad. He had some good books in there. But yeah, so I just kind of thought it over, and I told him, yeah, let's do it. And I remember the trip, moving all those books to my parents' house at the time and storing them in the garage, because at the time at our house we were fumigating. We had just bought the house, and then we found out about termites, so didn't want the books in here while we did that. So they're at my parents' house. So what I would do, while we were staying at my parents' house, I'd be in the garage till like 3 a.m. while my pregnant wife was asleep, just kind of going through all these books, bagging and boarding everything, trying to price stuff. And I think I kind of mentioned he was big on buying multiples of things. So he had like maybe like 5 copies of XMen 120, for Alpha Flight. So what I had decided is like, okay, I'll sell the lower copies to make some money to grade these nicer ones, So just going through all these books that whole night, and also trying to reconcile it against that spreadsheet that he had to see I'm trying to remember what he has called out, saying he has specific books, but I didn't see them in there. So I was kind of freaking out at the time. Like, oh no, did I lose them? Did he sell it already? And stuff like that. So it was a lot of late nights doing that before I even attempted to sell anything, But that's kind of where I got my feet wet in terms of like how to sell those books and selling on Instagram. I made an Instagram page just to sell stuff, which that's AOnes Comics. If you look at like the first post I made, it's basically showing a picture of all those books I got and just saying like, I'm going to try doing this on here. I just got all these books. Let's see how it goes.
Real quick, what's kind of funny, I don't know if I've ever told you. So when I first got into collecting and I realized there was a thing on Instagram and blah, blah, one of the first pages I followed and would watch their claim sales was the comic shop in California, A1
in Sacramento, yeah.
Yeah. And then I saw you, and I just assumed that was like your shop when I first started talking to you.
And I was worried about that, honestly.
And so it wasn't until later that I was like, oh, these are not the same people. Because like I watched this guy, I was like, that's not him.
Yeah, so that's why like when I put my profile, I tried to say like A1's comic stash, because that's what it was. It was my stash of books at the time. Yeah, I know. I think you're probably the second person to tell me that over there. Like when I think at one point someone had mentioned on live, so like, oh, there's my friend A1's. They're like, oh yeah, I like their shop in Sacramento. I was like, no, that's not me. That's not. But if anyone ever cares to know, the reason I came up with that's my close circle of friends, they call me A1, so that's where we got comics. But that's why I made sure to spell it as ONE versus to hopefully avoid any other confusion. But of course, when you read it and say it, it's this exact same thing. So, yeah, A1's comic stash. But yeah, so that's why I made the page. I picked up that big collection, sold it on consignment. All
Were you able to sell it all?
Yeah, sold it all. It took. I started late 2019 and finished like at the beginning of 2023. So what's that? 3-4 years? Well, kind of three, because it was like at the end of 2019, like November when I started, and then January 2023 I did a show in Claremont, the one I kind of talked about before, and I sold the last remaining books. I got rid of them that day. So yeah, I'd say about 3 years it took me to get rid of all those books. Um, like gross sales, like before like eBay fees, before grading fees, all that stuff. I think it was like 45 or 46,000.
Dang.
Yeah, so it was a lot of money. It was a lot of books, a lot of time and effort. But I learned a lot, you know. And I kind of mentioned that about restoration and stuff like that. Like that was the first time I ever got purple labels, and that's the first time I had submitted stuff to CGC as it is, you know. But yeah, I remember it was XMen 58, that Neil Adams Havoc cover, you know, that blue one.
Yep.
Color Touch got hit for that. I'm trying to remember. I think it was a Doctor Strange issue 1 from his first series. There was 2 copies. One had Resto, one didn't. And yeah, so that's how I first came across like what's restoration, what's color touch, you know. And looking at the book after I got it back, like yeah, you can totally see like yeah, there's a little dot right there. Like I would have never guessed to look at that, you know. And I remember bringing it up to Greg at the time, like, oh, hey, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't know this was a thing. And he's like, he was cool about it. And he's like, I wonder if I bought them like that, you know, like, I wonder who sold it to me like that. I wonder
Yeah,
if they.
because he wasn't sitting there coloring him, I guess.
Well, let's. He finds out later. So I guess back in the day, he was collecting with his brother. His brother had mentioned like, oh, I found your the set of markers you had as a kid. I remember you said like. And I was like, hey, Greg, you essentially did this to yourself, you know? Yeah, we joke about that a lot. But yeah, so again, the things we do as kids, right? We want the book to look nice. So yeah, I'll fill in that little crease there. No big deal. Like no one's going to think about like what it's going to do the value down the line, right? We're all kids, right? We don't care if we're cutting up or writing in our books. So yeah, so that's what I found out about restoration. So all that to say, I learned a lot from selling that collection on consignment in terms of like how to deal with people, how to pack books, stuff like that. You know, I've only had a few instances of like stuff happening, like the book bent or something in the mail. I think off the top of my head, I could say 3 for sure. But each time you learn from that, okay, don't use this packing material, or, you know, try to sturdy your box. And this was before Gemini's really big. So stuff like that, you know, you pick up again through trial and error. And yeah, it sucks at the time. Yeah, you lose money, but still, it's like that's the only way you're gonna learn, you know. So yeah, that was a fun experience. And it basically again, all that money that I made from doing that, that's what I use to buy my books now and buy books to sell. So it's just like this constant cycle, you know. That's what I call my comic fund for the most part.
Yeah. And I mean, tell people like how often are you doing claim sales, or is it all just Instagram posting? Tell people that.
It's not. I can't say there's like a regular schedule. It's whenever I have time to do it. I got 2 kids, so and the youngest one just turned 1. The oldest one's turning 4 next month. So it's like, as you can imagine, it gets pretty hectic at times. I try to do it. My goal is to do it like every other week, but at this point, I'm lucky to do it like once a week. I'm sorry, once a month. And that's if I'm lucky. But I'm big on. I feel like I like putting more time and effort to setting up at like actual cons and shows out here, especially like the smaller comic shows, not like the big cons like San Diego Comic Con or like WonderCon, stuff like that. I like shows where it's just like just comic books. I feel like that's where I actually do good and actually meet other collectors that collect comics. So I've really enjoyed doing that. There's one that's coming up in June out here, Near Mint Sundays. I'm not sure if you're following them on Instagram, but definitely
I've seen them. Actually, I've seen you post about Near Mint Sundays.
Yeah, if you're ever out in California, man, see if you can stick it over one of their shows. It's like it's a really great show. Just nothing but comic books. That's a big deal to me. Because like yeah, cons are cool. Having all the artists there and the writers and all the cosplay, that's all fun. But it's like at the end of the day, like I just want to be able to look for books.
Yeah, and then like the few dealers that, I mean, I've talked about this a lot. Like
Yeah.
the dealers that are there, it's just like, why would I buy this book? It's 5x over what I can get for it anywhere else.
Yeah, and like I hear the arguments every now and then. It's like, want to have the time to reprice everything, and obviously they have overhead with setting up at the show, especially if they set up at bigger shows like San Diego Comic Con or stuff like that. Like I get that, but to me, it's like if you're not putting that effort to do that, to like kind of make your books more appealing to a buyer, like why am I going to spend money with you? Of course, there's some people like they look out for you, they'll take care of you, and you establish that relationship with them. But that takes time. But you don't really want to try even attempt to doing that with someone when they're like marking the books up like way high.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like there's a component like to some degree, sure, maybe they put the books up, but they don't actually really want to sell them. But it's more of a lure to get people in to come look at the boxes and things like that. And that's fine. But then there's also just like some of this is just like, this is absurd. Like, I actually watched a video today. It was a channel that I'd never seen before.
I saw you share that.
Spros.
Right?
And he was showing exactly like he was like Fantastic Four #5 at 2.5 or sorry, 2.0, which I can find you a few copies on Instagram right now that I know of that are in the $3,500 range. And the list price that he showed from that show is $9,500. And he like goes into GP. It's like, there's never been a recorded sale ever of a 2.0 at night. It's just like, what are these guys thinking? Like that's beyond. And like he's like, some people are like, well, a lot of them, when you actually talk with them, it's like, yeah, but if they're setting the bar at $9,500 for a book that's a third of that, like their idea of coming to in the middle is still way overpriced.
Yeah.
So
I think that's the thing. Like, I guess I always kind of tell myself like it's a sales tactic. Like there's obviously a lot of these folks do it as a business. Again, they're dealers, whatever, and maybe that's how they feel like they need to make money. But it's just, I guess, I feel like the more we have this focus on like data and stuff like that, with sales data, like the more that practice I feel like should be just be going out to pasture.
Totally. And like, again, like,
because it's like, what are you doing? We all know, we all have that visibility now,
Yeah. And it's like, you're like, well, I have to cover my costs at the booth here at the, San Diego Comics. It's just like, well, if you overprice everything, who's going to buy them anyways to cover your costs? Like, is one thing I wonder about.
And I always say like maybe there's just one person. They're hoping for that one whale to come by and just like do that. And at that point, everything's covered, and everything else could go at market value.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a businessman. So
the thing too, I think, and again, I'm not a dealer, so take that with a grain of salt. But like, I also think one of the biggest, and I actually think for someone that's personally collecting this as well, if your idea is that you have to make a profit on every book that you move, like that's just not going to happen. And I always tell people that it's like you talked about yourself, you bought Werewolf by Night 32, you bought all these books, and now you're like, I don't necessarily need to, these aren't the ones I want to hold on to, like, so I don't need everything. So it's like, let's use those books to buy what you want, right? And even from a business perspective, right, if that's a sunk cost, like if you bought that book in 2021, sorry, like that price isn't there anymore. And it's, in my opinion, it's better to move the book, get cash back in hand to then, as a business, reinvest into more liquid stock, but holding on to that entity or that asset that is not worth what you want to sell it for is just holding it is not going to accomplish anything. And I think it's even going to hold you back. And I think from a collector side of things, it's the same thing. Like, I want to use these books to buy, the book I want, but I'm not going to lose money on them. And it's like, that's just not going to get you anywhere. And like, the way I think about it is like, obviously the goal is to not lose money.
Right.
And you're going to make money on some books, some you're going to break even on, and some you just have to bite the bullet on. Like, if you want to move, at the end of the day, if it's new money back into your pocket to buy what you want to buy, that's the end goal. Right. And then too, I think like, let's just say you bought a book for $500 and the way the market is, it's like, you're only able to get $425 out of it. And you had the book for, let's say a year and a half. It's like, well, think of it this way. That $75 loss was the cost for you to enjoy it while the time you had it. Like, it's not the end of the world. And if you're taking that $425 and putting it towards something that you're going to truly love, and, obviously that may change in the line again, but the whole idea is elevating your collection to what you want it to be. And if you're using the money that you have already invested to not have to put in new capital, like, I think you're always going to be ahead.
Yeah. And I think that has a lot to do with like how people, or like what their motive is in doing all this. Like, are they really approaching this whole collecting as like assets? So I think that's why some people are kind of more stubborn, like, oh, I'm not gonna take a loss on this or something like that. Versus like if we're more like you kind of talked about, more collector centric, where at least I'm getting money to get something else that I want. I feel like those are kind of two different pools of people that we see a lot of days. Um, and I could say like I kind of step in and out of both. If there's something I want, like if I have books to get me towards it, I'm gonna let them go, even if I'm taking a loss on them.
I'm the same way. Yeah, if these no longer fit my collection, like they're gonna go.
Right, like there's no reason for me to keep them. But at the same time, like I kind of talked about, like I try focusing on a certain amount of books. So it's gotten to the point where I'm kind of like don't have as much sell fodder, like trade fodder to get rid of. I have these books that I like, and I only really want to get rid of it if it helps me get to that book. So that's what I'm like. I don't want to sell this if I'm going to take an L on it. Like it becomes a matter of like, well, especially now because we talked about upgrades. Like I want to upgrade my 7.5 to an 8.5. Hypothetical, but I'm only going to do that if it makes financial sense to me. Like if I'm not losing money by getting rid of these books, especially again because I have a thinner pool of books to get rid of.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing is like when when you're talking to someone that is moving something that you want, I always think the worst thing the last thing I need to hear is, well, I'm into this X amount of dollars. Like I don't care. Like
yeah,
I don't care. Like I get it, but like the numbers that matter are what the market rate is. Like what you're into it is irrelevant to the conversation.
Right.
So
and I get to that point too, but the only time where I get stuck on the point was like when I'm focused on like what I'm in on a book is again when I'm trying to upgrade.
Yes.
If at that point it becomes a decision where like I'm not going to sell this if I'm going to take a big loss because of what I'm in on it, maybe it's just not the right time to upgrade.
Yes, that's different story.
I feel like it's different. Yeah, like you said, it's different versus me trying to like, hey, I really want I don't know what's a book. Let's say I decide I want to collect Spidey one day, right? I want an ASM one, so I'm going to liquidate all this X-Men to get that. That's a different story. But like if when it comes to matter like upgrading a book I already have, it becomes like how badly do you really want to upgrade it? Most of the time I don't want to upgrade it that bad. So
I mean like that example I gave, the 500 to 425, like that was when I got my Daredevil 1.
Mm-hmm.
I sold New Mutants 98. That was the book that was 500 I took for 425. ASM 300, ASM 230. Like I made some on a couple of those books. I lost some on a couple, but like at the end of the day, I got 100% of the money I needed for Daredevil 1. And that was the goal. And that is what I wanted. That's what I got. Like mission accomplished.
Yeah. So that's a big book to get, It's like again, something that you wouldn't really think you'd be able to buy outright unless you made those moves to get that book. And yeah, you might take a few losses on a couple of books, but still you end up with something that you really want. And I don't know, like I think most people need to focus on that a lot of times. It's like, why are you doing this if you're not trying to get some type of I'm trying to remember the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic value. Basically, it's not about the money. Like you got to be doing this because you get some kind of joy out of having this book, not just like this is an expensive book. I have it,
Yeah.
So that's only momentary. Like the next year, it's not going to be the same value anymore, as we've seen.
Yeah, and I mean the thing, and to be perfectly honest, like who knows? Like in 5 years, the books that we are loving right now, that we're striving for, that may change too.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's every collector's story, right? Like again, look at me, look where I started, and like now I'm just focusing on X-Men. Like I'm trying to raise the bar on all the Silver Age books I have. Like I
mean, it's funny. Like I'm a first appearance collector, as kind of how I look at it for the characters that I like.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of those characters that I love just because of the era we grew up in the 90s. A lot of those first appearances are Copper Age books.
Yeah.
And now, like, I almost am completely out of Copper, like, because I've been just selling them to and then there's a couple I like to keep because, like, first Gambit, for instance, I want to have because I love Gambit.
Yeah.
But like Venom, I had no problem moving that to get to my Daredevil, and even though I think Venom's cool and he's obviously one of the biggest characters there is, it's just like, you can't have it all, and so you really got to define what it is you want, what it is you love, and then also you have to understand that like that's not necessarily going to be forever. Like you absolutely could change, and also too, like that's also like the thrill of the hunt. Like you did this, you accomplished it, you made, what's the next big deer I can knock down on the hunt.
For real. Yeah, 100%. And it's funny that you say that because I think about the GSX. I just got a 9.4, right? So I'm just like, now it's just a matter of like, what's next, So yeah, it's the thrill of the hunt, kind of seeing like how, for me at least, is like how far can I raise the bar on my collection, especially of these books that I really like. So I'm trying to bump up the Werewolf by Night 32. So that Raw book I ended up buying. That was one of the first books I got graded for my own collection. Came back a 6.5. I turned that into an 8.0, I think it was. And then I had that cracked out and pressed and regraded because the old label, and came back at 8.5, which is the one I currently have. But I'm trying to get to a 9.2 or 9.4 at some point.
Nice.
So yeah, that's what I get the joy out of, like just seeing like how nice of a copy can I get myself, but then like at the same time, like, so as I kind of mentioned my comic fund, I use some of that money to do upgrades on my books, and then some money to buy books that I think I can make a little bit of money on, because that's what this is all about for me, at least in terms of like funding my own collection. Like in order for me to get that nice Werewolf by Night 32, I got to move some other books here. So what books can I pick up to kind of make up, even if it's just like $2 or something like that,
Yeah, it is funny. I do notice, for anyone that follows you, knows you. Like, I also feel like the books that you're picking up to then resell are also fairly narrowed to a lane. Like, you are always picking up X-Men books, Spider-Man books. So sort of like, and it's funny. So like when you see a good deal on Instagram, there's so many times I was like, I see you AOnes Claim, like I see it.
Okay, that ASM 300 from Mark, I remember that one. Collectibles.
Collectibles, yeah. And I got that X-Men 4 before you did this time.
Yeah, that was a good one. Well, and that's the thing, because I tell myself like, I like picking up some books to try to sell to make some money on, but it's like I tell myself, don't buy anything you don't want to get stuck with.
Yeah, exactly. That's the rule you got to think of, right? Like, same thing with like trading or anything like that. Like, don't grab unless it's like something that is like, this is a freaking steal and I'm gonna make a boatload.
Yeah,
of it,
yeah.
right? Like,
but I mean, how often does that come up, right?
exactly. It's very rare. Like, you gotta think. Yeah, that's the exact mentality. It's like you need to use the books that if you happen to get stuck with them, you're not gonna be upset about it.
Yeah. So that's kind of why I stay in my lane for the most part, like X-Men, or like when doing Spider-Man. For me, like ASM's always just really sold well, So if I ever find any of those issues, I'm buying them because I know a lot of people like it. Spidey, like I'm not one of them that's going to keep them, but still, I know a lot of people out there that will. And then of course, back to Dave, West Coast Avengers, see Todd by Todd. Like everyone likes McFarlane, so it's like, yeah, stuff like that you just pick up, And again, I do that for the hopeful goal of upgrading the books that I have. So it's like I tell people, like, I don't do this to put money on the table, or money on the table. I don't do this to put food on the table, Like I don't have to do this as like a job. I don't have to feed my family for it. I'm just hoping to make some money so that I don't take money out of my family's pocket, so I could buy myself something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's kind of the same thing too. Whereas, like, I don't like to tell people like I'm not investing in these books. Like,
Yeah.
when we talk about investing, no, that's a separate thing, and the comics don't take away from that.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, like that's kind of what I do with AOnes Comics. Just really just like the books I put for sale. It's either I'm selling it so I can hopefully upgrade. Like I had posted the Werewolf by Night 32, but I ain't getting bites on it. Or it's something I'm just trying to move to generate enough capital to do something else. But yeah, it's worked out pretty good. Like it's just been like a kind of self-sustaining fund. It takes a lot of time and effort. I don't do it as much as I think I should. Like I feel like the real successful people are the ones that are like on a regular schedule, like every week or every other week. It's just like constant churning out posts and content, and that's kind of how you got to work the system with Instagram, right? But I can't do that like as much as I want to do that, or I don't even think I want to do that because I don't know. That seems
there's other things in life.
Yeah, there's other things I'd like to do. Like I like to just hang out with my kids. I'd like to chill out, listen to music. So yeah, it's always kind of juggling these priorities, and comics is one of them, but it's not like the biggest priority. So that's why I'm probably not as active as I should be in terms of like making this goal.
No, I get it. Like I would love, for example, like I would love to do more to like build funds faster.
Yeah.
But the time it would take, I have 3 kids, like, as many people watch the show know, and it's like I just don't have the time to be at the warehouse sale at 6 a.m. every Saturday and things like that. Like if I also like to think too, like even with this like channel, like I want to be able to do like I record on Wednesdays because I bring my kids to my parents' house on Wednesday, so they're downstairs right now playing with with my parents, and they'll
Yeah.
let me do this. So it's like I want to do these things but not take away. So I completely understand that mindset. I would love the situation if someone came to me with like that 4,000 books or what, not 4,000 necessarily, but like, hey, I have this, you want to consign it, we'll split it 60-40, whatever it is. Cause like, then I don't have to go search. It's like, I just have this set. And it's like, I can just work through it as I have time. Like, that'd be great.
Yeah. And I was talking to Greg the other day. He had texted me kind of out of the blue. I hadn't talked to him in a while. He was dealing with some health stuff. But yeah, like, and I told him like I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now, and I wouldn't have the books I have now had you not presented me with that opportunity. Like because again, I learned a lot from that. I made money from that I then used to like enrich my own collection. So it's like that's a big deal to me.
Yeah.
Like none of this would be possible if it wasn't for him. Just like, hey, I'm gonna trust this guy and see if he could sell some books. So
Yeah. And again, this is also not to shame anyone that does anything differently. Like everyone has their own life and you do it how it fits into yours. And,
yeah,
you know, everyone has their own certain way of how they make life work. And this is how we do it. And
yeah,
that is what it is.
yeah. And so it's kind of just like this fell on my lap in a sense. So yeah, like super grateful for that opportunity, and I wouldn't be here now if it wasn't for that. So I made sure to thank him that time because, like I said, he was going through some health stuff. So it's pretty scary, but yeah, just thinking about it. And at that time, I think I had just gotten the 9.4 GSX. So it's like this book, like this is what like the book for me. If and I tell people this all the time, like if I have to rank my X-Men books, it's like GSX and issue 4, X-Men 4 kind of tie to each other in terms of my favorite book, and then it's issue 1. Like, yeah, issue 1's the first appearance, stuff like that, but it's like that cover doesn't stick with me. Like that story doesn't stick with me. The pages inside GSX stick with me more. The cover of X-Men 4 sticks with me more because I love like Magneto front and center. Probably my favorite. And people ask me that's like, oh, who's your favorite X-Men? It's like Magneto. Well, that's not an X-Men. I was like, yeah, he kind of technically is. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would answer in that boat.
yeah,
So
and it's like so like on issue 4, seeing him front and center right there with the Brotherhood, like that's such a cool cover to me. I love that cover.
yeah,
But yeah, like again, I wouldn't have any of that had I not had that opportunity. So all that to say again, and I had hoped to mention when I talked about like setting up at local shows and stuff like that, I enjoy that because you get to talk to people more, you get to like see what people collect, what people buying and stuff like that. So it goes back to thing like just be nice to each other, especially in this small community and stuff like that. Like I feel like that's kind of what got me in this relationship where I was presented with this opportunity, because like we bonded over comic books and we bonded in a positive way. So it's like that's only going to get that's only going to help you if you're like that with other people, whether it's on here on Instagram or it's like in your local community. And I bring that up because I feel like nowadays, like I just see a bunch of stuff on Instagram, like, there's always some type of drama. But I feel like people don't bring that same energy to their local scene. You know what I mean? Like the actual local community of comic book collecting. And yeah, I get people don't have time to do that. Doing it on your phone on Instagram is a lot easier, right? But still, like building those relationships with people around you, like it just leads to like things working out better for you. Like I talk about those warehouse sales, like they let me kind of go in before they even open the doors because I've established this relationship with them. Like I've spent decent money with them. I'm pretty friendly with them. I help them out like in terms of like loading, unloading sometimes. So it's like you get in what you put in. You know what I mean? So it's just okay. Let's say just like be kind to each other in this community, especially like people are gonna buy what they want to buy. Let them collect what they want to collect, but just try to help them with it. Everyone's gonna have their own collecting goal. Like whether you're trying to get like a Daredevil 1, X-Men 1, like everyone has a different thing. Like just try to help each other out. And I say that to everyone like a lot. Like if you're not buying a book from me, like if I'm too expensive, that's cool, man. I'll gladly look out for you if I find a cheaper copy, and I'll tell you if I know there's a cheaper copy. Like I don't need your money. Like I have no obligation to sell you the book. You have no obligation to buy it from me. I want to help you get whatever book it is you're trying to look for. You know what I mean?
yep, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just kind of wanted to talk about that because again, just like I think a lot of people it'd be nice if more people put more effort in like establishing those relationships in the local community versus, you know, just on being cool on Instagram all the time, because we are real people behind these phones, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why we like having people on the show to hear these stories. So
yeah, and you know, when you present me the opportunity, like, you know, I knew about your podcast, but it's like, again, when we talk about time and like having time to just sit down in front of your phone or your laptop and watch something, like it's always hard to do.
yeah.
So, but yeah, like it to me, I was like, well, what am I getting myself into? And it's like, well, they're genuinely just like interviewing people and asking them about their collections. Like, that's cool. Like, nobody's ever asked. I mean, yeah, people ask me like out here, but still, like, just like a podcast or YouTube channel about that, like, that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And with that, I mean, that's a kind of a good kind of wrapping up point, so, Aaron. So again, thanks for coming on. I mean, this has been awesome as always. Like, you know, love hearing people's story. As we finish up here real quick, tell people where they find you, where they can, you know, if you need some books, need someone to find them or help you find them, you know, where are people looking for you?
If you're looking to like buy stuff, kind of have on here, it's at AOnes Comics. So at AOnes Comics, one spelled out. A lot of people still haven't caught on, but I also have my personal account. It's Arrow Party. So a lot of times when I'm buying stuff on live sales, you'll probably see Arrow Party claiming stuff, and that's also me. So if you want to follow that account, that's my personal account. I'll post pictures of my kids and stuff like that. So not just my books, for my kids, but A1's Comics is just strictly for me trying to sell books, because I didn't want to bombard all my friends and family with like, buy comics all the time, you know? So yeah, check out A1's Comics on Instagram. Again, I try to be fairly regular in terms of like having some books at least once a month. I try to cover all stuff in terms of like cheaper stuff, value stuff. And it really just depends what I got in at the time. I have a lot of long boxes right now that I haven't even priced out yet, because I'm going to be setting up at Near Mint Sundays on June 8th out here in Anaheim, California. So if anyone in the local Southern California community wants to come out, talk comics, buy comics, we'll be there.
Right on. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. As always, like, comment, and subscribe. And we will check you on the next one. Peace out.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.